I don't think anyone is saying that there's a quarrel. But before I come to Professor Giri, this is, of course, the Prime Minister tweeting about his upcoming reception at the White House. President Biden has a similar comment out. Derek, is there a fight? Is there a quarrel? Are there two minds on the hill? Or is India now, frankly, too big, too important, too critically strategic to be either able to ignore or to be able to nudge, even on some typical questions? You've had a bunch of lawmakers in America write and say, bring up human rights, bring up the democracy question. This is not a government and this is not a country that is going to take lectures from Washington. How does the Biden administration handle that?
Well, I think the Biden administration's already decided what they're going to do. They're going to press ahead regardless of the criticism from numerous human rights groups, as well as some representatives in Congress, about inviting and feeding, Modi to this lavish state dinner and opportunity to brief a joint session of Congress. I mean, look, Barker, this is all about, strategic interests at this visit specifically, right? And as I said earlier, to bring India in as this enormous counterweight on China's western flank is an enormous victory, really, for the U.S.'s Indo-Pacific strategy to counter Chinese coercion and assertiveness throughout the region. And that is what the Biden administration has decided it wants to hang its hat on. I have some, I guess, fairly limited reservations about that. Others have far more reservations about it because we simply don't know where this is going in India. Modi is almost certain to get reelected next year. I think everybody on the panel would agree with that. And the concern is that domestic politics in India are such that essentially the BJP dominates and is not, respecting the rights of minorities and press freedoms and other things. Now, that said, when you kind of look at the universe of U.S. allies and partners, I think India is hardly the worst. Okay, there's certainly others that are far worse on those counts, right? But when you think about a state dinner, we've only done now 3 under the Biden administration, right? The first and second were for France and South Korea, respectively, right? So those are pretty tried and true democratic allies of the United States. India kind of stands apart from those in some respects. And so I think that's why you're seeing some of the angst. But again, the Biden administration has completely gone full on into India is the future of the 21st century, especially.
Yeah. And I would say, and I'll take that back to Ambassador Talmiz in just a moment, but Professor D.K. Giri, we are live on those pictures from the White House. You see Vice President Kamala Harris there. We are expecting a formal reception for the Prime Minister in a moment from now. But I want to bring you in. I think it's quite interesting that there's still the op-eds of the liberal media, the Washington Post, the New York Times, saying Joe Biden's got to push the Modi government on issues of religious minorities, on issues of democracy. You have 3 or 4 left-leaning lawmakers who've said, we're not going to attend. We're not even going to go in and listen to the Prime Minister as he speaks to the US Congress. But my feeling is that Indians across party lines would not appreciate, even those who are critics of Modi, might argue, let us criticize him. Who are you? Who are you to criticize him? We'll criticize him at home if we need to. Do you see this becoming a big issue? What for you is the most important element of this trip, Professor Giri?
Well, that is not going to be an issue in an intergovernmental relationship. You see, the US administration may informally raise it with Modi, but never on record, because it is a manifestation of realpolitik. Even a country like Sweden, which is an exemplar of social democracy in the world, they said, how do we balance trade with human rights? So when the governments talk, they talk of their national interest, and that is trade and strategic interest at the moment. And let me also say that US and India inevitably will become an ally. There is no choice, but they are fumbling on both sides. But it will lead, the geopolitical reality will lead them to become an ally. That's why I have been arguing that India should go for a formal alliance with Americans. Multilateralism is utopia. Let me tell you, Jaishankar, I don't know where he has studied the history. Tell me, since Second World War, where the world was
You
multipolar.
you you want the Indians to
It was
join?
always bipolar from Second World War onwards.
We
Tell me
India was
one
never
state.
India will say we should be a pole. Why should we be
So
a
no, no,
member
no.
of
But
an alliance?
that is too ambitious. Barkha, tell me in one time in world political history when the world was bipolar. I mean multipolar. It is an utopia. Were we non-aligned ever? We are never non-aligned. It was again an utopia. So strategic autonomy is an utopia in an interdependent world. America should realize that. America's problem is they create a Frankenstein, they go to fight it. Afghanistan, Iraq, and wherever. So
Yeah,
they do
yeah.
not understand India's concerns as well. Whether India, India should also be very clear about what they want. You cannot run with the hare and hunt with the hound. You see? So the point is,
So,
you have
so
to
you
make
want
your
you want the Indians to pick a side, and you want that side to be the United States of America, Professor
absolutely. I
Giri.
have written several articles, and I have said there is
Okay.
no choice. Americans have no choice. If they
Okay,
want to, they want
I'm
to
just,
preserve their
I'm
supremacy.
just smiling because very few people say this. The Indian consensus. If there's a Washington consensus, there's a New Delhi consensus, and the New Delhi consensus says we ain't taking no sides. Now, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, I want to bring you in. Sorry, General Shukla, I know you have your hand up. Give me just a second to get the ambassador in. And look, everyone, feel free. If you have something to say, just raise your hand and we'll come to you. As we await the ceremonial welcome, and we'll have the sound up on that in a moment from now. Professor Giri says, "Hey, listen, don't live in this theoretical little imaginary world of yours. Pick a side. Pick a side. China is your biggest adversary. There is no multilateralism. That's the textbook phrase. Get real." What would you say, Talmisa?
The world has been multipolar for at least 10 years, if not longer. By multipolar, I mean there's a whole series of nations who are asserting their role in world affairs quite independently of the two major powers that have emerged. The world is not bipolar, it is already multipolar. You have seen this with regard to the Ukraine war. Numerous countries of Asia and Africa and Latin America have not supported the American side with regard to sanctions and have not given them political support. The overwhelming criticism of the American policy has been, don't push this binary upon us. Don't force us to make choices we don't want to make. Whether it is the ASEAN or it is Northeast Asia or South Asia, West Asia, and all the other countries. So we are already in a multipolar world order. It's the Americans who are trying to prevent this by pushing this bipolarity onto the world, and nobody is buying it. The only nations that are part of the American complex today are these Europeans. And I will tell you very frankly, and I have said this earlier, it's not going to work, it's not sustainable. The Europeans are not a united entity. They have their own interests internally, and I am not sure many of them are particularly thrilled with the kind of posture the Americans have imposed on Ukraine. There is a need for a ceasefire that is well recognized in Europe, and they also have suffered very seriously. I'm also a little perturbed about the very enthusiastic support for defense cooperation with the United States. It is not the business of the Indian Armed Forces to be screaming from the rooftop about one particular engagement. We must be very objective here. There is, we
But why
have
should
not
we?
seen,
Why should
we
we
have
not? Why
not
should we?
seen any evidence of serious transfer of technology by the Americans. Let us be very clear on this. Let us not imagine a kind of El Dorado, a magic wand will occur overnight, and suddenly these wonderful toys will start coming into the Indian market, and the Indian armed forces will become the greatest in the world. This is all rubbish. No, the Americans, I am also concerned about the Indian Ocean. We have screamed from the rooftop about the Chinese intervention in the Indian Ocean. And are we comfortable with everyone else coming in? You have the Americans already dominating the Indian Ocean. You have the British coming in. You have the French coming in. You even have the Germans who barely have a navy coming in. India is being cornered in its own region.